An age of virtual programming, I always like to ask people, tell us where you're Zooming from today.
Well, I'll say I am zooming from Brooklyn. It's a little chilly, but I think it's supposed to get warmer.
Okay, awesome.
I'm spiritually with you in Brooklyn, Zakiya, because I consider myself a Brooklynite, but I am
Wow.
now a Bama girl. I'm down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Roll
Oh,
Tide.
okay, awesome. Okay, okay. Yeah, that's a little risque here in Arkansas, home of the Razorbacks. But
Mm,
thank you guys for telling us
fighting
about
words.
that. Right? It's a beautiful day here in Little Rock, and I'm so happy and honored to be able to speak with you guys today. I've enjoyed both works over the summer so much. And so it's really cool. I know I asked you previously if you would mind gracing us a little bit with maybe a favorite passage from your work for a couple of minutes. I think it's always cool to hear written word in the author's voice. So yeah, if one of you want to volunteer to go first, then we'll do that. And afterwards we'll have a little discussion about it.
You want to kick us
Zakiya, do you want to
off?
go? I can start. I can start us off.
Yeah.
Let me go first and get it over with.
Sounds great.
Well, let me just say thank you so much to you, Jessica, for that introduction. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you to Brad Moy and the entire Six Bridges Book Festival team for making this run so smoothly, for the Central Arkansas Library System for hosting us, and a millennia of thanks to my dear mentor, Kevin Brockmeyer, who invited me to join you guys and talk to readers in Little Rock and beyond. So I'm going to read a section from the Rain Check at MomoCon story, which is set at Comic-Con. And you'll notice that I speak in a variety of different voices. So you might get like a voice that's lyrical and sermonic in my first story. And then you might get another voice that's honky tonk and hard boiled. This voice is a little teen speaky and tweeny. And full of blurty comic book references. So Rain Check at MomoCon. There is a crush of stormtroopers, men of steel, and Optimus Primes milling around the cavernous confines of the Javits Center. Surrounded by freaks and geeks, Astrid Atangana wonders how she and her friends, the self-styled Nyanga girls, come across to the Comic-Con crowd. Bolo rocking grills and street gear, calling herself Fly Girl, Superman's dope-ass cousin from the hood, Mimi in the Psylocke cosplay costume, pre-ordered from China a full month in advance, and her, a too tall Black girl in a too short red kimono, wearing bifocals no less. She takes off her glasses. She cringes thinking about the Princeton admissions letter, secreted away in a notebook in the far reaches of her knapsack, then secures the bag straps along with the side-slung holster of her katana for what feels like the cajillionth time. Ooh, Batman has a bomb booty, Mimi opines, twirling an eely purple hair strand that slithers and coils around her index finger. Her flicky eyes are fixated. Medusan, Astrid thinks, filled with equal parts fascination and equal parts disgust, watching her friend watching yet another dude. Which Batman? Bola asked. They're like a billion Dark Knight wannabes up in this piece. Look at these Clone War mothers. Him. She points an accusatory diamante crusted stiletto nail. It has a gold gun charm and it's swinging wildly at each and every offender within eye shot. Man, folks is so basic. That don't matter if they hot though, Mimi says, jerking her head to the left, like dude right there could totally get it. Answering their black looks with a rapid fire whisper, she says, him, the retro Adam Westy one over there by the whole Halo booth. Oh my God, Astrid, don't look straight at him. Astrid is already looking straight at him. Staring, in fact. Bola rolls her eyes in exasperation, yet all too soon she is staring too. Batman catches their gaze and gives them all an even-toothed tic-tac grin. Mimi denies him a smile. Instead, she turns away, flips her synthetic tresses, then tosses him a knowing, coquettish look over her shoulder. Classic Mimi, Astrid thinks. she hopes he's worth it. Hope that her girl gets her bang for her buck. Mimi had spent 2 weeks worth of pay to buy her wig. Its shock of violent locks had to be the exact same shade of purple as her costume. The cheapo wigs at the beauty supply store in the West Orange Mall where they all work were deemed insufficiently con-worthy. A schlubby East Asian boy wonder sidles up and palms Batman's left butt cheek, his wandering hand partially obscured by a waterfall of midnight blue polyester. Manhandling, Astrid thinks, her brain continuing a week-long streak of randomly churning out M words, morphing her into some Tourette tickish freak she felt like. It was weird but strangely familiar, like the month after their class trip to see Hamilton on Broadway, when everyday conversations tempted her to segue into song. That month talk of Batman Tiny might have triggered wordless humming of I like big butts, baby got back under her breath, or at least some bars from the Nicki remix. All right, I'll end there.
I'm not trying to be biased, but that is one of my favorite out of the short stories. Just because the teen years are they're weird. The adolescence is a weird time. So it's even as an adult, I still love to read just about people who are kind of journeying through that age group. So yeah, I wasn't going to give you guys like, oh, read this part, but I'm glad that you selected that one because it was one of my favorites.
I was mind-nudded with you on that blurty tip right there. I sensed that's just what you wanted.
You got it. Okay. Your turn, Zakiya.
That was amazing. That was so much fun. I feel like our pieces kind of speak to each other. I mean, I'm now wishing I had picked another selection. But yeah, I love the fun and the conversational aspect of that bit. And so I kind of have a similar part. So I'm going to read from first of all, thank you so much, Jessica and Nana, for being here. And I'm so excited to chat with you. I think this is going to be such a great conversation. I'm sad we couldn't be in person. I've never been to Little Rock ever. And so hopefully another day soon.
Yes,
right?
Definitely. Yes.
We're going to rain check.
Yes, rain check. We will recreate this in person one day. All right, so I'm going to read from chapter 4. And the only context that's necessary is so this book is about, well, a lot of things, but the main thread is 2 Black women meeting in a very white publishing house called Wagner Books. The main character, Nella Rogers, has been at Wagner Books for a while. Hazel is the other Black girl who starts working next to her. And Nella's been grappling with this very problematic character in one of her white author's books, and she's trying to figure out how to broach that topic, if she should broach it at all. So this is Nella and Hazel getting lunch for the very first time. And Hazel's trying to squeeze that information about that book out of her. And Nella's like, no. But then finally, of course, she says something. All right. So Hazel, come on. You and I both know we got to stick together here. And who knows, maybe my outside perspective will help. Nella couldn't argue with that. And so she told Hazel everything about Chartricia and needles and pins. Her disgust, her reservations, she dumped everything she'd been sifting through in her mind right there on the table between them. By the time she finished, Hazel had eaten her entire lunch while Nella still had a whole sandwich in front of her. Sorry, she said, peeling back the plastic so she could take another bite. It's just that every time I talk about it, I get even more frustrated. And I wonder, am I just crazy? Am I overreacting? Shit. From what you've told me about Chartricia, it sounds like you're right to feel the way you do. I read one of Franklin's novels for a book club in high school. Illegally Yours, I think it was. The portrayal of the Mexican woman in that is so problematic. I can already imagine your pain. Nella made a face. I know. Thankfully, I wasn't here when he was writing that one. And what kind of name is Chartricia, anyway? Sweet Lord, Shaniqua wasn't good enough for the stereotypical Black girl name? Of all places, that was where he really felt the need to get creative? Girl, preach, Nella said, snapping her fingers. This is exactly what she needed to hear. I'm with you on that, but that's why it really sucks, because I can't call him out on it. Why not? Because he's just going to think I'm calling him a racist. You know how white people get when they think you're calling them racists. Nella sighed, remembering how, shortly after the bout of diversity town halls, she'd overheard a couple of Wagner employees in the kitchen chatting about the idea of being forced to hire non white people. Let's just go into exactly that, Kevin in digital marketing had said indignantly. Exactly that. And then let's watch what Richard does when we start hiring unqualified people here and things start getting really screwed up. I'm sure he'll change his song then. Kevin's back had been to Nella, as had been the back of the other unidentifiable white guy he'd been talking to. But even if they had seen her, Nella sensed that neither would have said anything differently. Her colleagues, strangely, had made it clear very early on that they didn't really see her as a young Black woman, but as a young woman who just happened to be Black, as though her college degree had washed all of the melanin away. In her eyes, she was the exception. She was qualified, an Obama of publishing, so to speak. Sometimes she saw this as a blessing. They never really bothered asking her for sensitivity reads, and they rarely asked her about Black issues, either because they didn't want to offend her by doing so, or because they simply didn't care enough to ask. But other times she found it almost demeaning, as though accepting Wagner's job offer had also meant giving up her Black identity. Girl, you're speaking my truth, Hazel said, tapping her plate with her fork. Even when you just subtly imply that a white person is racist, especially a white man, they think it's the biggest slap in the face ever. They'd rather be calling any they'd rather be called anything other than a racist. They're ready to fight you on it, tooth and nail. It's basically their version of the N-word, Nella agreed. Which is hilarious because Black people have been called niggers for years, and they've always just had to keep it moving. Always had to just stay walking down the street without complaining. For centuries, Hazel said, hitting the table with her fist, we've been called niggers, man. And for maybe 30 years, we've been calling white people racists. I mean, the word didn't really mean shit in our English vocabulary until fairly recently. And even now, some people still don't count it as a disqualifier. But suddenly, it's the end of the fucking world for these people. Nella sat stock still, taken aback. Everything Hazel said rang true with what she and Malika bemoaned after hearing the latest news flash that yet another politician had been caught doing or saying something racist. But Nella hadn't expected Hazel to get this passionate. She'd done so well keeping up with Maisie and Vera's Boston chatter that time they first met. She seemed so good at keeping her cool. The well-dressed Korean couple sitting at the table beside theirs hadn't seen the outburst coming either. Nella noticed they'd stopped speaking to one another and were curiously looking over at them between bites of food. Hazel seemed to register the change at the nearby table, too. She unclenched her fingers and breathed out a small, sorry. No, it's fine. Actually, it's really refreshing, said Nella, so thank you. My parents are pretty big in their community for social activism, Hazel added quietly, and my grandparents were too. My grandfather actually died in a protest. It's in my blood, I guess. Nella gasped. Oh, wow, Hazel, I'm so sorry. When? 1961. He was protesting one of the new busing bills. Excessive police force. Hazel used air quotes for these last few words. Nella's hands found her cheeks. An amalgamation of civil rights movement footage flashed through her brain in black and white, complete with an angry rush of police batons and a soundtrack of somber Negro spirituals. Wow, she repeated, at a loss for a better word, even though there were many. She settled on and added, I'm sorry. Hazel shrugged. Thanks, but I'm here, ain't I? I don't think he'd be too sorry about that. I just done there.
Wow. I that lunch between the two of them, it resonated with me when you're working with new people and you have to kind of make that decision. Is this going to be like a work friend, like a friend? Am I going to be transparent or not? That's happened to me pretty much on every job I've ever been on, where you're kind of having to balance making a decision. Am I going to open up to this person in a professional space with something personal, or am I going to constantly have my work persona, and when's a good time and who's a good person to kind of relay that too. So it's definitely something I think is totally relatable, especially if you're a Black woman and you're working in spaces where there isn't someone that looks like you. Even when that happens, you really have to kind of make a decision. You know, are we going to go in here with the team spirit, or are we gonna be like, yeah, we're a squad, or no? So yeah, that definitely something resonated with me. I'm aware that both of your backgrounds kind of subtly were reflected in your work. Zakiya with your editorial background, and Nana with your Cameroonian heritage. Could you tell me a little bit about how both of these, how they're rooted in who you are, and how did that come to life? These in your mind?
I'm always trying to be polite home training right here. You got three Black women on screen, but on screen we're trying to have home training and be like, okay, you go and then you go. Okay, let me just be forcey.
Go for it. Go for it. I'll do the same.
Yeah, I mean, so there's so many. First of all, thank you for that lovely reading, Zakiya. And I was actually, when you were talking, it was like some of my editorial background also was reflected in my book as well. And it was just like, preach. Because I actually have like a character in Kinks who's an editor, and she's like, they hired me, these white folks hired me to be their Negro whisperer because she's on a Black imprint. So it's just like, so now it's only Black folks that I can edit. I only got, say for, like Machiavelli to the return of the pimp kind of stuff like that. So that makes some reference in there to the editorial industry, but and publishing. But yeah, no, for me, it's like everything that I am comes to bear on my writing. So yes, my hyphenated American status, having been Cameroonian, born and raised in Washington, D.C., but also going to the continent and living there. So that kind of hybrid identity, living in that liminal space between these two worlds, absolutely informs some of my characters. So you'll see that playing out in identity politics on the page. But there's so many different liminal spaces I exist in, hella blurty. So that blurtiness and that Black nerdiness, you'll see that reflected in that reading check at MomoCon. I get to put in all my stuff did you know MLK was a Trekkie, all that good stuff, which was true, so, and then I get to kind of explore the African charismatic church and the devil's a liar. I get to explore, relationships, both loving and the living infinite and fraught in Kinks. So I think with every writer, we end up writing a little bit of what we know and then kind of using that as a jumping off point to kind of create worlds. So
yeah, I can totally relate. I mean, the liminal space, I haven't had, it's not the same, of course, but having grown up in a suburb of Connecticut, I very much was in between worlds also, in the sense of being the only Black girl in my class for a while, speaking a certain way because of that as a young person, wanting to wear my hair a certain way because of that. And then getting to middle school, high school, where there were other Black people who were not from my neighborhood. And having people say what are you? Who are you? Why do you talk like a white girl? All of those kinds of things. And me being like, but wait, no, I can tell you all the words to I Have a Dream speech. And I listen to the Spinners all the time. I knew where I came from and how I was raised. My parents were I want you to know where you come from and who you are. But when you go to school day after day with mostly white people, it's just a lot, especially during February. So that's part of why, though. Yeah.
28 days.
28 days. 28
it's all
reasons.
for you. Yeah.
Yes. And so that exactly. So that identity, which is also, I should add, not something that I actually was thinking about really as a young person, because I wanted to kind of squash myself down and fit in with what I was around. I didn't really think about those things until I got to grad school and I started writing essays about my Blackness. It was 2014, 2015 when I moved to Brooklyn and gone to school at UNC Chapel Hill. Which had, of course, a lot of stuff going on, but it's also a bubble. I didn't really feel forced to really truly grapple with my Blackness and how I was raised and all of my insecurities about my Blackness until I got to grad school. And I wrote about cutting my hair off, about being tapped to play Phyllis Wheatley, who was, of course, a remarkable human being, but also a slave, and a Black History Month play in elementary school, and like what that meant for me. And all of those experiences found their way into Nella. And I was really aware of it while I was writing for the most part, and of course the publishing parts too. But honestly, it's not until like I've been having conversations like these when the book was about to come out, and since then, where I've really been unpacking how much of that experience working in publishing, and then all of the years that led up to that affected how I move through the world. And so that's, I mean, all the women in this book have pieces of me in some way, but Nella definitely, again, like not feeling like you're not Black enough, that worry is something that still sometimes follows me around, and wondering, like, how do I keep my sense of self while working in this corporate system? And now that I'm not in corporate America, but still, this is the system. This is how it works here, no matter what. Proximity to whiteness is the thing that gets you the farthest, unfortunately, in a lot of different industries still. So, yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, so preach to everything you said, Zakiya. And honestly, sometimes that insider outsider status affords us the ability to kind of like, I think that's why I'm a storyteller, because do have like, I'm always observing, because you had to fit in, you have to figure out where did you exist along this spectrum, right? That identity stuff is deep within me. Like, I mean, like I grew up, my full name is Wombo. That's got NGWAH-MBO. Wombo Nana Nkweti, but still, I spoke a certain way, I conjugated a verb or two, and then it was like, you trying to talk white, so it was just like, I think like, like nerdy Black girls of a certain era, you grew up hearing those type of things because like, and like, and trying to expand the sense of what Black identity can be, and why it shouldn't be just one thing, which is why I write about blurbs, and it's why I write about women who are defy that strong Black woman trope and are vulnerable, because that idea of like one, like, we shouldn't like essentialize ourselves if we don't want others to do that, right? If we make ourselves just one thing, and then we complain that, oh, you guys are so always stereotyping us, like, houseway, so.
Yeah.
I think being forward about who you are, the things that you like, is just essential to just being a human being. It's not to one category. You shouldn't have to do that. It resonated with me a lot about them going to Comic-Con, because like me and my brother went to see Dune yesterday. We were super excited. We had a great time.
Oh yeah.
I graduated high school in 2002. Most of the time I was listening to 3 6 Mafia one day, and the next day I was reading Lord of the Rings. That's just, that's what it is. So it's one of those things where I feel like sometimes when you're trying to define like what being Black is, there's just not a definition for that. And you shouldn't have to kind of sway that. But especially when you're an adult, though, it becomes a situation where, well, I have a job. I have to make a living. So are these things that I'm going to have to do to navigate? So those are kind of things that really resonated with me. I was wondering if there were any topics in these that gave you pause, where you were thinking, this is going to be controversial. Maybe I should not write this. Or this part, am I pushing it just a little bit too much? Is this going to be the thing that catapults me from, oh, this was a great work, to we're not messing with that? Were there any parts like that, but you did it anyway? So
I'm giggling because I definitely had a few of those things. I mean, first and foremost, like I quit my job to write this book, like finish writing this book, because I started it while I was still there. And I didn't really set out to critique publishing. First and foremost, like I really wanted to write about just like two Black women dealing with this weird, uncomfortable, oftentimes very problematic, full of microaggressions place. But then publishing I just could not resist. It was so much fun. The comps, the language, all those conversations that like when I was in it, right? But also I was like you were saying, I had one eye also on like watching myself watching these situations and why I didn't say things at certain points, or and so I was worried, like, I didn't want this to just be about publishing or make people think I was like, you know, da 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 about this person and that person, because a lot of the people in this are amalgamations of a lot of people that I've known in publishing and out of publishing. So that was one thing I was worried about. The other thing I was worried about, and that's something this is something that I really want to talk about with Black women is like we were talking about, Jessica, of like how many diverse experiences there are within the Black community. And I really wanted to get the Nella Hazel relationship right. Like I didn't want Hazel to be, you know, this like reckless person creating all of these problems for Nella that, you know, were just too villainous for anyone to understand where she's coming from. Because like we already have a hard time getting away from negative stereotypes, and so really finding that balance of making these characters three-dimensional was something really important to me, and I hoped readers would take away from it, not that, you know, we are always keeping each other down. That's not the point. The point is what
it
is
didn't
causing.
come off that way initially to me.
Okay.
But I thought she was I was skeptical. I thought she was
mean,
really sneaky. I thought
yeah.
Hazel was sneaky from the beginning. I found
Yeah.
myself covering my eyes sometimes. I was like, it's something, which I don't know if that's like another Black girl experience. But the minute she was introduced, it was something about the way you described her.
Yeah.
I was skeptical
cool.
about her from the beginning. Right? Yeah, I was. I don't know if I was thinking, like, found myself rolling my eyes at her description, like, okay, you know. And I was like, what am I doing?
That.
But it really transported me into like meeting that girl.
Yes.
And wondering what that girl is about. So.
Yes. Thank you. That's great.
It's so interesting that we're so protective of like Black womanhood and our images, even on the page for our, you know, for our like make-believe characters. I mean, I felt that way because like, I mean, like, so in Rain Check and Mumblecon, the story that you like, there is Mbola, right? And they're the frenemies, right? Like, I was like, I didn't want her to come across as some kind of cartoon, like rolling her, you know, twirling her mustache villain. So I actually went back and I had moments where like, where she's protecting Astrid, and like you can see, like, you know, where even that moment where she's like, Astrid didn't understand, like, wow, like, you know, how she was part of the clique, and that you know, that same aggro energy she would get, Bola would put that on somebody who tried to step to her wrong, you know. So I ended up doing some of that because I was just like, I didn't want her to be like, you know, in some moments, yes, she's an avatar of like, you know, all the things that like Astrid wishes she could be, my protagonist wishes she could be, but also she's a truth teller, right? She says, just because she's louder than you doesn't make her, you know, any less what she's saying invalid, right? So I think that was one of the things I thought about when I was looking at the stories and like revising them. That happened to me even like with my character Ladasha and The Devil as a Liar, right? Where she's like also dealing with like a character who might come across as the protagonist, and people are more tending to be much more sympathetic to the woman, where her husband, even the woman's husband, says, hey, you know, maybe you're being classist when you're saying this about this person, you know. So I tried to complicate those narratives because one person is going to be, you know, villainous. Like, I feel like, you know, Black women should be allowed to be evil, but we should be allowed to be, you know, angels. We should be allowed to be in everything in between. So anytime I had a dichotomy where there was like a character that was a woman of color acting as a foil, I tried to complicate that in particular, that narrative. I wasn't, you know, I thought about that with some of my white male characters, like, which I have two white male characters, and one of them is actually accused of murder. so I was like, I'm not complicating that.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, Nana, because it made me think about just for Black women, I find that most of the time people look at us like the moral compass is high. Like, you're supposed to be like, ooh, we're not above it all the time. Just sometimes it just is what it is, or we feel something just because that's what it is. And I think that is something that we should lean into more, and give ourselves some slack on, you know, to be honest.
But like in a non, like, you know, stereotypical way, because we like the man, Sapphire, Jezebel, all those archetypes for Black womanhood. Like, you know, I don't want to be like too much mammy, like, oh, it's always gonna be like, you know, the sister girlfriend always taking care of your problems, or you don't want to be too like, you know, Jezebel, like she's always a seductress, like a, you know, like Carmen, or she's always too, you know, like too Sapphire, like always angry about something. You know, you have to be careful. Like, so it's like, as long as my characters come across as nuanced, even the people who like get on my nerves, like, or get on my nerves in real life, if I knew them, I feel sympathetic for them. Like, as long as I understand them and I know who they are, I feel good, yeah.
Yeah. Are they interesting? Even like you said, if they are a little bad, are they interesting? Can you see another side? You know how it is when sometimes you're reading a character and you feel like you understand how they got there. If
Oh
there
yeah.
was a situation where they're kind of evil or you understand how they got there. It's relatable. So.
That's what I did. Like my first story, I told it from like the perspectives of like an adopted parents who adopted a child from Africa illegally.
Oh.
And her story, like I call her, like I said, she's got the disposition of a Uzi. She just like, and I'm just like, okay, that's how you do.
That came out of nowhere. I
it.
was not expecting that. Once I got there, I was, of course, that's the first story. And I was flipping and I was thinking, I knew something was going to happen because just it seemed set up perfectly for. Didn't think that though. Didn't think Homegirl was gonna come out on top like that, unapologetically. Did not see that, but I found myself the parents like I don't know. It just it pulled at my heartstrings a little bit, but it definitely was. Yeah, she came through.
I mean, like I said, I try to complicate the narrative because she's neither all good or nor all bad in either of their parents. Like, yeah. But I think I was supposed to answer your question about like stories that like gave me pause.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So since we're talking about Black womanhood and protecting Black women, I like that. One of the stories that gave me pause was the statistician's wife, where I had the murder happening. Like there's a dead Black woman's body immediately, like in the first paragraph, and I was uncomfortable writing that, and I was also uncomfortable, like showing us as the victimized, So I ended up having to, turning that on it's on its head by having her pretty much alive throughout the whole story, because the story ends up being told like they're investigating her murder, so you end up getting her like the story of this relationship and this couple so you get to see like Victoria on the page throughout the narrative, and like so that she is not just like that victim, and that was important to me. But I was uncomfortable because that was based upon like very real exuricides where the men were killing their wives, and those statistics that I was using were real, and the people I was using were real, and I was really worried about like it seeming like sensationalist and seeming like some kind of true crime like thing, and it wasn't. It was not at all. It was like something that I was writing about because at that time I'm a nurse. I was working as a nurse at that time, and I was just like, why are they killing all these African nurses? Like, I was literally just like trying to figure out what's happening, and then I understood like, a lot of it was coming from like, like before the words even came, like we didn't even have, this was like the mid-aughts, like the words like toxic masculinity. And, I just knew that there was something happening around gender where like these women who were empowered and they had jobs and they happened to be nursing, because nursing was a way for like these African immigrant women to be brought from back home, like do 2 years of nursing and make buku bank. And then all of a sudden they've got agency, they've got a say, and the terms of a marriage start to change. And if you're not secure in your masculinity, that was causing a lot of disruption from like what people thought, a traditional marriage should look like. So that was unfortunately what was happening. And I just wanted to interrogate that and figure out what was happening, and I didn't want it to become about like, oh, because it was a black men are doing this to their wives, because I felt like this was something that, and that's why I ended up like, having a white male protagonist, because it was not about like, Black men being, bestial, and just like beating or killing their wives. It was about like what is happening in marriages and like, in gender relationships, what's happening with women and men that makes this, like this spousal violence and this intimate partner violence so prevalent in our society. And that's what I ended up writing about.
Wow. Let's talk about, go ahead, Zakiya.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, it's amazing how much, I mean, they're not small details, but like deciding who you decide to be the protagonist and whose perspective and what details are told when, like all of those things just really have a huge impact on that. And I can relate to that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
speaking of impact, let's talk a little bit about how writing these particular works have affected you personally as a writer, like fear, confidence, growth. Like, what are some of the things that you got out of this personally?
I mean, I got a
Zakiya.
therapist after
Oh my
after
God.
this. I've been
Really, Zakiya?
yeah. No, I mean it's
Oh,
like
wow.
so the thing is like I'm not a public person at all. Like I wasn't a social media person. And so, I mean last year was also a lot. That's the understatement of the century. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think for me, the thing that was the hardest for me was that I'd gone from being in assistant positions for all of my professional life of, just saying yes or like going along with things and not really having decisions to make on my own. And when I quit this job, when I quit publishing, that was like one of the first times where I really decided, okay, I need to decide if I'm going to actually see if I can write a book or not. And so to go from kind of that position to being an author, who's now like working with a publisher in this capacity was like a really big transition for me and just really overwhelming. Because again, like a lot of my own kind of like being in my head, like, did I end that email in a nice enough way? All of those things that like Nella is constantly preoccupied with are things that I have worked through and also like hadn't really realized, as I mentioned earlier, were things that I was still figuring out. And so that's been honestly, I think, the best thing though, even though it was hard at first, was having, having the knowledge or the wisdom to know that I just needed to like talk to someone about it. But the other positive thing I will say has been just like remembering why I wrote this book too. It's like you're in the weeds, you're by yourself, you're like, who's gonna actually, is anyone gonna identify with this? I know for me, like I had such a specific experience of like growing up in this space and like, yeah, knowing all the Rod Stewart lyrics and like being able to like tell you every I Love Lucy episode and like all these things that like are very specific to me and translating that into a character who, maybe um, readers don't know that world or don't know, some of the references that Nella mentions, but I'm hoping that they will see themselves in her. And so getting responses from readers, especially Black women readers, just saying like they feel seen, they feel like this book is something that's for them. That's been one of the most amazing things.
That's awesome. I can't imagine being thrust. The first time I saw you actually was on Good Morning America.
Oh
So
my
I'm like,
God.
so that was like the first time I saw you. So I can imagine you saying that you're not like that kind of I can't imagine because that's like platform. So that had to be daunting.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. I mean, Robin Roberts, like, honestly, like, the moment I met her, I was good. Like, and I think that's the thing too, is like the energies of people that I've gotten to chat with, like you guys, like that, I thrive off of that. I wish it were in person, but that really has been the thing that's like, I love that so much, that connection.
Look at that blessings coming through, right?
Yes. Yes.
And woo to Black girl like in therapy, like Black girl, Black people in general, we go through the most and then think we don't need that. We don't,
Exactly. Exactly. We're told
so
that though, it's like,
yeah, like
the
I was talking
thing.
about that. Like I said, like that whole like strong Black woman archetype. Trying to break that
Mhm.
down and like our lives and and embracing it, but for embracing all our Black girl magic by recognizing too, like, hey, even the magician needs a day off and needs to
Yeah.
talk, like needs a day of rest. Like, I need to go sit down and put my feet up and work on them potions,
Mhm.
and speak to somebody about like, why I'm having potion block, whatever you need to do to kind of like recharge yourself,
Yeah.
So thank
Yeah.
you for speaking on
Self-care.
that. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. So the question again, like, so
How are you affected personally by writing Walking on Cowrie Shells? How did it affect you personally? Growth,
oh my
fears?
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, like I've been writing since I was 9 years old. So writing a book, like and writing stories was just like part and parcel of who I am as, as a person. So I think it was just trying to like, publishing it was a different thing, trying to make sure that you get your work out in the world and trying to figure out like, like who's the best publisher for you, trying to find out an agent and all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, I was like, and I did everything I could to, give myself a good start, like Black folk, we like to get our credentials because we know sometimes like, like that access is not is not given. It's not a given in this industry or any industry. So I went back and got my MFA from from a fancy school, and agents came there. But those are the kind of things that I had to figure out, like positioning myself so that I like my work could find a place in this world, and that was like part of the journey, even as much a part of the journey as the creative part is, because like the creative stuff is always going to be, that's just me, like it's endemic to who I am. But trying to figure out the publishing stuff, which Zakiya, you were living in, so from the inside, right? So you know how to navigate all that stuff. But all that stuff, like that people would come in and be like, oh, we giving the agent how much? I mean, you wouldn't know anything. You wouldn't know like 15%, and you wouldn't know like what they're supposed to do. You wouldn't know like, oh, like, I'm sitting there, I love writing short stories. All of a sudden, like people are like, oh, where's that novel at though? It's all those things, all those like intricacies of publishing that you have to kind of become really, really conversant with really fast. Or else it can break down the other part of you that is like the imaginer, the person, the part of you that wants to write, so like it just loves it. So once you get that taken care of, like, you can play and enjoy yourself. But when you're trying to play and then trying to navigate all that stuff and it's weird stuff that's wonky and unknown to you, that was the more interesting part. So I just try to find really great partners. And I think that was my journey. Like you're talking about meeting people who have good energies. That was what I tried to do. Like just trying to find people who could, so that I could, put that down and rest and then know that I'm being taken care of on that end, and let the other stuff flow. So
isn't that always the case with most things that you're doing? It's like you have a part of it that you love so much. And if you could just drive off that one part, it would be awesome. But there's always that little part of something that might not be your niche. And you really have to kind of dig into yourself so that these things can go together. I find that happens with me a lot on so many things. I kind of hone in on the things that I'm really good at, and I have to really manipulate some of the other stuff. So I can totally understand that. When you guys were writing these, how was the process? Did the ideas for these works come in waves, or were there like times where you had to take a break and redirect yourself? And were you having trouble like finding your voice?
I'm gonna let you take that one first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for me, like I said, I've been writing since forever, like really, really forever, since forever. So yeah, it does happen in waves. It happens like when you're talking about finding your voice. Like it's interesting for me because like I have a voice as an author, which is like, and as a person, that's very kind of like like I'm a chatty Cathy, and but then like I'm very, very voice driven with all of my stories. So like that voice that you heard, that's like little teen speak, who's like a little neck snap voice is different from like my lyrical, there are hymns, there are hosannas, there are hallelujahs voice. That's a voice from The Devil is a Liar. There's different voices that kind of push me and pull me through all of my stories. And once they come to me, I'm good. Like, and like, like the stories are, like what you write, what I write about ends up just being an amalgam of things, things that interest me in the world, things that I'm reading in the world. Like I said, like when I was a nurse and hearing those stories of those African women, like, I knew I wanted to write about that, but I just, until I knew what kind of voice that I was going to write in, like when I knew that I was going to write it from, I needed a little bit of distance because it felt very close. So I started thinking, who could, who would be dispassionate enough to convey this, and then also make maybe committed the crime. So I started writing in that statistician's voice, and that allowed me to access and go through the, writing something that would otherwise feel like very personal. So that's what happens to me. Like, like a voice pulls me through a narrative, and then things that I see, have heard, I've read about, things that interested in me in the world that I wanted to interrogate, end up like, that voice tells me, oh, you don't know you went to that seminar 2 years ago so that you could write my story. That was what that was about. So now we're in the story, and now my voice is pulling you, and then we're, I'm telling you my world together. So that's how my stories come about.
Gotcha. Awesome. Zakiya?
Yeah, it kind of changes depending on the project. I mean, I'm thinking about my next book, and it's coming very differently to me than the other Black girl did, which really was like, for me, I mean, I immediately started writing chapter 1 at my desk after encountering another Black woman in the office who I didn't know who she was. It turns out she'd been moved from another floor for like a little while, like construction stuff was going on. But I was so baffled because I was like, who are you? And then why aren't we talking? Why aren't we friends? Because she completely, was not looking at me, was not checking for me. It's the bathroom. But that moment was really the catalyst for me to start writing this book. But it was, of course, working at Knopf Doubleday. It was, all of those things I talked about earlier about the essays I'd been writing, the nonfiction essays, and really incorporating those into Nella's story and the other women's story. And it came out of me pretty quickly. The thing I will say, though, is that when I first wrote the draft, it was all Nella's perspective. And then after that, I went back and I just started writing from first person for the other 3 characters in this book, for Kendra, Ray, Diana, and Shawnee. And those came out in a way that I don't think they would have come out if I had tried to write them while writing Nella's story, because those 2 stories are, of course, happening parallel to one another. And I really wanted to first figure out what I wanted Nella to know. And then go back and be like, okay, how can I make this the most interesting and the most exciting? So that took a lot of kind of Jenga and figuring out like just placement, and also having other people reading it after a while, because you can't, sometimes you just can't look at it and see the bigger picture because you're so used to it. So yeah, I don't know. It's, again, this next book, it's going to be really interesting.
It's funny because one of the questions that we have in the chat was about some of the things you guys have coming up next. So Zakiya, you mentioned a book you're working on, and and how that's going. So that was one of the questions. Anna, what do you have going on?
I am working on a sci-fi hip hop novella, and it's taking many forms, like,
Wait. Sorry, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm having so much fun with it. I'm actually even working with a composer right now. So it's like in novella form, but it's also ending up as a performance piece, because the composer is working with a gentleman who has a cybernetic clarinet. And I'm recording myself, like reading portions of it, and they're putting my voice through the clarinet and like distorting it and making it sound like I'm on Star Trek, like I'm in space. And so it's all interesting and experimental. So we're like having a call and responsive energies. Like I'll listen to the music and listen to like my voice being distorted, and then at the end, like adding a little Afro beat to it. It's just interesting. And then I'll be like, I'll write in conversation with that music. So the novella is like it's wonderful. I'm having a good time, and the dialect is like the alien language is my mom's dialect, so I'm loving like sticking it in there. So
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We were talking about controversial topics. Someone asked a question about publishing. You guys both talked about that a little bit, and just were some of the difficulties with getting some of the things that you wanted included, because some of the topics are, I think, a little bit on the controversial side. So did you receive any pushback with that? Were there things that that you guys might have not wanted to change, but you had to kind of reformat, or how did you kind of stick your ground with that?
I mean, I'll answer quickly because I would say one of the reasons why I talked about publishing and making sure that I seeded the ground and chose wisely, so that I wouldn't have to make that kind of like, concession later on. Like I just found publishers who were just like, be more gonzo, go more crazy, do you, Nana, be more of yourself. And that like I try to make as informed a choice as possible up front. Right. So I didn't have to kind of feel like I have to half step on what my artistic integrity down the line. So thank you, Grey Wolf. Thank you for being about that life, so.
Hello, yeah.
Yeah, I had a pretty positive publishing experience, but I think that's for a few different reasons. I think the book is about publishing and how shady it can be. So I do think that, when I was talking to editors before I started working with Atria, or talking to different people about it, and I mean, accountability came up, the recognition that like this book is about a lot of them, a lot of people who work in the industry and have allowed it to be the way that it is still, or are, still compliant with the very, yeah, just the complicated roots of publishing itself and racism of publishing. And so I thankfully really had a runway to just do what I was going to do and not explain the Black references, and have a cover that was created by a Black artist. And just I'm really grateful to Simon and Schuster and Atria, because I know for a fact that's not how it goes all the time, especially for authors of color. So I feel really lucky.
Yeah, it definitely gave me an inside track as to kind of some of the things that go on. Because sometimes you read something and you're like, who was in the room?
Yes.
Like,
all the time.
so it did give me, as just a reader, an inside track of kind of some of the things that go on the back scenes. Like great things like these just don't pop up in your library or on Amazon. There's a lot that's going on.
Yes.
And behind the scenes. So that was super interesting. When it comes to authors, someone wants to know what authors and or poets are you guys loving right now? Are you guys reading for pleasure?
Oh, no, I am reading for pleasure. I am. I've been listening to the audiobook, so I like it's the same thing, but like that sensory thing's not happening right now. But I've been reading What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coster, which came out in March, I believe. And I love the narrator, Bonnie Turpin. I'm a little biased because she was one of the people who narrated my audiobook, but like it's so good, and it's a story that travels through time and class and race, and I've been really enjoying that. And then I also have been rereading Passing and revisiting that story by Nella Larson, because I had a really big influence. The way you were saying, like you went to a seminar and then 2 years later it affected you in a way. Like Passing for me, I started not long, or maybe right around the time when I started writing this book. And that tension between those characters definitely present in The Other Black Girl. And I think Passing I think it can be different things for different people. And in this case of the book, it's, being a Black middle class woman in a white world and code switching. So
Right.
Classic, yeah.
Code switching, girl. I think there could be whole books, maybe a set of encyclopedias, seminars, and a lot of more stuff just about that. I don't think a lot of people just in mainstream America like realize that was kind of a thing. But yeah, it kind of is. So there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah. So what are you into right now, Nana?
I'm actually I haven't finished it.
Okay, you're in the process.
I was actually reading Zakiya's book in preparation for this event. Yeah,
so cool.
Yeah, and I've been getting a chance. It's kind of hard to read for pleasure. I'm teaching full time and also doing stuff. I'm working on a new project at hip hop sci-fi, and then trying to be out in the world with this book. So it's been a bit of a journey trying, but just talking to all these wonderful Black women. I had a chat with Nana Akua-Hammond last week. So I was revisiting her work. So it's actually kind of allowed me to be like, hey, there's some wonderful Black literature out there in the world. Let me get back to it, and not be, bogged down by teacherly stuff. I mean, and plus, it's okay. We're in the middle of the semester, so I feel like I can breathe now, but you're Zakiya is talking about Nella Larson, and I'm thinking about Women in Brewster Plays. I'm thinking about Gloria Naylor. I always especially when I'm doing my own writing, I always jump back to some of these seminal writers who made me feel whose right work, Linden Hills, anything by she rests Miss Morrison, anything like that kind of gets me, fills my cup so that I can be reading, so I can start writing as well.
Oh gosh, definitely. Tony passing. I say Tony because I feel like I know that lady. I never met her in my life, never saw her, but I feel like I know her for some reason. I was gutted when she passed. Like it just kind of seems unreal to me. Sometimes I think just some people's words just touch you in a really personal way, and you feel like that you really know them. And speaking of knowing people, even though we're virtual, this is a sign of the times because we have a question that's asking about your background. Zakiya, for you, it's the chalkboard. Someone wants to know what is the chalkboard about? And Nana, it's the beautiful books that you have open behind you. So, sign of the times. I'm like, that was an awesome question. So, tell us a little bit about each of those.
I was going to ask about the books too, Nana.
Yeah, like if you go to my website, there's a media kit, just like contacts. There's on the contacts page. There's a media kit. You'll see it's like a huge. This is just like a 4x4 panel. It was an 8x8 foot like backdrop that my friend and I made in Iowa when I was putting together my DIY Black Girls Can Do It, even though it's a little bootleg, but it's gonna look all right. This was the author photo like backdrop. So I wanted to have something that looked professional. So, I got these palettes off of Craigslist when it was given away for free. Then I got like books from like thrifting and what have you. I'd taken this Center for the bookmaking class, so I knew how to take books apart on the spine, take the cover off. So I made this, so my friend and I made like I said, it was huge, but I just took one panel and I'm just it's just part of my life now. So.
That's super interesting. I thought that was such a cool question because I wasn't going to ask, so I'm glad someone asked in the chat. And Zakiya, the chalkboard, do you use that for a creative process or is that just your grocery list?
Yeah, no, no. My husband and I moved into this apartment in January, and the first thing I didn't know about anything else. I just knew I wanted a chalkboard wall in the office, and so yeah, it's where I brainstorm. It's where when I'm in the middle of something else, if an idea comes to me, I'll put it up on the board, and sometimes my husband and I will just talk through it, and I love it. Wow. I'm a handwriter, in most kind of for anything I'm writing, I like to write a really, really rough draft in my terrible handwriting. And so this is just another way for me to get it all out before I lose it, because that feeling sucks.
Definitely. Very cool ideas, you guys. And the hour has went by so fast.
I can't believe it.
It's like we're 2 minutes from the ending. And so I want to sincerely thank both of you. I've enjoyed this discussion so much. And I'm kind of sitting here in disbelief that this is my job to have so much fun during the day because I've enjoyed the discussion immensely. And I hope that everyone watching has too. I also want to thank Central Arkansas Library System, all of the team that puts together this festival. We have a great lineup. It's not over. So if you're interested in any of the other authors we're going to have on, please register. And if this was like your first introduction to these two wonderful ladies and you have not read these, I definitely suggest you do. Cal's does have them. The wait list is a little bit long because I was waiting and then Brad made these available to me. I don't think he's getting them back, but at any rate, I enjoyed reading them so much and enjoyed the discussion with you guys. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for participating and answering all my questions today.
A pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ladies. This was so much fun. And thank you, Six Bridges, too, and everyone who tuned in.
Little Rock. Bye, Little Rock. Bye, Six Bridges. Bye, Jessica. Bye, Zakiya. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You guys too. All right. Later.